This is Katinka.
And this is Simone. And you are listening to the Novotech podcast.
Our guest in today's episode is Gabriel Pacor Bracco, Principal Architect at Australia Post. We discuss and dissect enterprise architecture, the differences between different types of architects. We talk about how architecture is done across different industries and what steps one can take to become an architect. We hope you'll enjoy this episode. Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Our guest today is Gabriel Pacor, the Principal Architect for Australia Post. He has extensive industry experience in enterprise, business, solution, application, and integration architecture, backed by years of solid consulting, delivery, and management foundation, from small to overhauling enterprise-wide transformation projects. Welcome, Gab. Thanks for being here with us today.
No worries. Good day. Great to meet you. Great to be here. Thank you.
We usually start with an introduction, so please go ahead and tell us about yourself and your tech journey.
Sure thing. Yeah, so my name is Gabriel. You can call me Gab. And my journey in tech spans quite a long time. I started back in the UK, actually, about 20 years or so ago. And as most people that start in tech, I started my journey in development. So I started, cutting code essentially in Java and J2E, and it was great. I loved it, every moment of it. And to be honest, even nowadays, whenever I walk past the desks of developers and I see them cutting code, I'm kind of a little bit jealous of what they're doing. So that's what I started. Back in UK for an online publishing company. It was a great start, lots of great mentors and lots of really clever people who kind of helped me start my journey. And then from there, I then went on to spend nearly a decade in consulting. So I joined a consulting firm, still in the UK. And I worked with them in all sorts of industries and organizations in the UK, and eventually transferred over with them over to Australia. And so, as most people in consulting, I've actually done just about everything that you can think of in IT, all sorts of different roles. Still carried on doing programming, but I did design, did all sorts of architecture roles. I did PM roles. I did roles in testing, the roles in support, and I think it was a great foundation to really understand how the entire life cycle of any sort of initiative in IT and how a technology function works. And then at some point, I kind of had enough of going from one place to another, and I kind of wanted something a little bit more stable, and also started to focus a little bit more in architecture. So I spent some time in education, focusing in architecture, and that was great. Met lots of great people there, and got to know a little bit about how the higher education industry works. And over the past few years, I've been kind of solidly on retail. So it would have been, I don't know, at least 5-6 years now, solidly in retail, probably more actually. And but all in architecture. So all up in architecture, I would say 10 to 15 years in all sorts of different roles within architecture. So yeah, really varied. Everybody in architecture has his own kind of journey or how eventually they get there. But yeah, that's been mine, I guess, today.
And ended up in enterprise architecture. So you said you are the principal architect at Australia Post. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, sure thing. So my role essentially looks after all architecture that impacts our retail network for Australia Post. So Australia Post has about 4,500 stores around the country, so retail outlets. So that's a fairly significant number. So essentially, my role looks after all initiatives, big and small, that have a technology component to it, and therefore architecture components to it. So we kind of chaperone it from initiation to completion, and also we put solutions together. We take them through governance and make sure that they are fit for purpose by the time that they need to be deployed in the landscape. So I ran a team. I have a team of architects, really experienced architects that help me, I guess, deliver on those outcomes for Australia Post, and it's great. I love it.
So what is the difference between different types of architects, just for our listeners who want to understand a bit more about it? Which characteristics do you think make a good architect, and what does it take to succeed in this role?
Okay, yeah, all right. I'll break it out. There's quite a bit in there. So I'll start with the types of architects. So there's quite a few different types of architects, depending on the organization and depending, I guess, on how the organization is set up. But in broad terms, when I think of types of architects, I would broadly classify them in 4 categories. The first one is a solution architect, and I guess the solution architect is the bread and butter of any architecture function. Is a type of architect that stitches up together a solution across different domains, eventually culminating with a solid package, a solid solution that meets the needs of the organization, and is eventually what gets implemented and deployed into an environment. So solution architects typically tend to be broad in reach, but not so deep in terms of coverage. That's typically how a solution architect operates. But most of them are nowadays, they are quite good and quite knowledgeable in at least one or two of those domains, right? Then we will have a domain architect, which is typically more narrow and focused, but very deep when it comes to that domain. So an example would be a security architect, for example, or a data architect, right? So don't necessarily cover all the other domains in the spectrum, but they are really knowledgeable in that particular one and can go, from really high level all the way to as low level as you can go. And these are typically the architects, the solution architects rely on to kind of fill in the gaps where their knowledge doesn't really quite reach. Another category is business architects. So these ones, they really focus more on, helping the business or business representatives to figure out, areas of opportunity, where to take perhaps certain products or where to introduce new services for whatever reason it may be in the organization. It could be for cost reduction or enhance your revenue or perhaps reach a different market. There's lots of different reasons, so they work closely with business representatives, and the ones that I've seen in the past actually report into business leads or business executives. So nowadays, recently, I haven't seen too many business architects, or I haven't, interacted with too many. But what I have seen is that some of those, qualities or characteristics that a business architect would possess tend to be, assimilated in people that hold some, different roles within technology. So perhaps you would see some of these assimilated in other types of architects, or perhaps GMs from a business and from a tech point of view, or leadership within technology. And so I guess it's nowadays almost an implicit thing for any type of architect to really be acutely aware, of how what you're doing impacts your organization and your business line. And the last one probably that I'll mention is enterprise architects. So enterprise architects tend to be pretty much a combination of all of the above. They are kind of broad, they're kind of deep in quite a few domains, but they typically also have additional responsibilities or accountabilities extend into governance, for example, or creation of patterns or roadmap strategy, that kind of thing. And they kind of work more closely with senior leadership, either in the tech side or in the business side, or both. But by and large, those are the main types. Now, every organization, there's organizations get very creative when it comes to role titles and what do we call certain architects, but by definition they will fall into one of those. In terms of what makes a good architect, well, in my view, most architects, regardless of role or title, will be very comfortable with technology overall, at least in the space that they operate. So really, that's not, to me, that's almost a given, right? To me, what sets one architect apart from the other is more the soft side, right? Is how good they are communicating, how good they are, synthesizing problems, how good are they with different types of audiences. And I think for me, it's just ability to relate to other people and being able to accommodate different personalities that you interact with in an organization to eventually get the best out of either the team or that particular person or the initiative that you're working on. So I guess in overall, I would say the tech side, it's almost a baseline, but it's the soft side for me that kind of sets one architect apart from the other. And to your last question, what does it take to succeed? Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. For me, it would have to be patience, persistence, and really just not rushing it. When it comes to getting into architecture, to really be successful, you have to be able to have a fair amount of successes on your belt, but also failures. A few scars from previous times where you've kind of learned on what things tend to work and what not in different scenarios, on different organizations, on different industries, perhaps even different geographies, and really be exposed to all sorts of different roles. So if you are able to kind of conquer some or most of those, coupled with really good soft skills, I think that's what I would characterize will make you successful in architecture.
Yeah, so just to summarize, so I think you mentioned solution, domain, data, business, enterprise, and what's common between these roles is that they really have to be able to understand and construct that bigger picture. Would you think that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite easy. Well, it's not easy, but it's easier to kind of lost in the detail of how do you solve a particular problem, whether it's big or small, but your ability to then synthesize and summarize this to an audience, a stakeholder or a set of stakeholders who have the important decision to make is what will, I guess, make you successful in that role, or at least one element.
Another point on this, you have been an architect across different industries.
Mm-hmm.
Based on your experience, would you say that the way architecture is done has more similarities or differences between the sectors?
I would say architecture is actually fairly similar and portable across industries and organizations. It's just the subject matter that changes, and obviously there are tweaks depending on how the organization is structured. From a hierarchical point of view, also how big and distributed it may be, right? So in a much smaller organization, you're a lot more nimble. You might not even have an architecture function at all, right? But another thing that may contribute to differences is how how mature that organization is when it comes to delivery practices and frameworks, right? So how good is that organization at delivering big programs of work versus little ones, right? And how much, I guess, architecture involvement they'll require for them to be successful. And I think an important point for me or differentiation here is one that actually was talking about recently with someone at work at Post, and is how much does business leadership regard technology and architecture as a partner at the strategy table compared to more of a function that enables you to just deliver on an outcome from a deploy the solution into production point of view, right? So how much from a shift in left point of view, how much is technology and architecture are really at the beginning of the conception of ideas and trying to strategize where the organization should go next. How close are they to that I guess the start of that journey. So those points what I would say are the main differentiators. But in terms of commonalities, I would say most organizations have at least one governance point when it comes to architecture. Most of them would have someone appointed the role of either the head of architecture or chief architect, or it could be an enterprise architect, or even a solution architect, depending on the size of the organization. And then solution architects, again, depending on the size, that partner with delivery to implement initiatives into the ecosystem. So, yeah, look, architecture as a function doesn't differ that much. There are all sorts of different ways in which you can shape it up according to the factors I mentioned before. But the I guess the practice of performing and doing architecture is fairly similar.
Yeah, I like to, of course, everything you said, but mainly 2 points. One is the culture of the organization, of course,
Yep.
that has everything, laying from the top to down, everything in between.
Yep.
And of course, the maturity of the organization.
Absolutely. Yes. I was speaking to someone, was it a couple of days ago, when from another organization, he was telling me that he had all these great ideas about how to set up this function, and he had done pretty much everything that you would expect, but their organization just wasn't ready for it, right? So it's always a journey, and it's always good with architecture and not just architecture, but most things, to just start small, nimble, and then build up as the organization needs it.
There is an old saying, one size does not fit all. So based on your experiences, especially in large projects, how do you see agile ways of working and enterprise architecture complementing each other? Is it doable? And if not, what needs to change for it to be successful?
Yeah, absolutely, it's doable. Agile architecture is definitely a thing. It's not a myth. I mean, we're doing it today, right now, at Australia Post at scale, quite successfully, I would say. So definitely doable. You just need to be able to be willing to challenge the status quo, right? Which is not an easy thing to do. So traditional waterfall architecture is essentially based on trying to know everything up front. Then you write a massive SAT that hopefully encompasses everything that you've discovered, and then you shepherd around this all the way to production, and hopefully it works, right? So that model is okay for certain types of initiatives. It doesn't work for all of certainly doesn't work for all of them. In some other initiatives, you really do not know everything, and it's just not possible, right? So you gotta take a kind of a bite-sized approach to it, but complemented with, I guess, the right team of people, helping you from an architecture and surrounding technical teams, having, I guess, support from your executive leadership, having, have strong values that tie the people who work together in these initiatives, you definitely can do it. You just have to really take a look at what works for you in your organization. How do you kind of break down the overall problem that you're trying to solve into chunks? And then what sort of artifacts from an architecture perspective you would put together that are fairly nimble, but I guess rich in content, and then you're able to govern them, and while constructing, I guess, a bit of an audit trail of how you went around about your architecture. So yeah, absolutely doable. And it's, to be honest, given that we are doing this post today, it is an amazing way of working. And I actually prefer it a lot more to kind of the more traditional waterfall. It forces your team to think differently, to be a lot more collaborative with the rest of the team and other parts of technology, and I guess be more agile, to use the term, in terms of how we govern.
Can I just have a follow-up on that? Because so for someone who is not an architect, which I'm not, I'm not sure I understand, why, or where is the problem, or why is architecture mainly done in a waterfall approach? Why is it so hard to adopt Agile?
Yeah, so it's essentially it comes down to many years of operating in that, and I guess in that delivery mode, where you kind of set up your project and your team at the beginning. You kind of work out everything that you can about that problem, how you're going to solve it to the nth degree, and then you eventually go through a delivery process that will take maybe a year, two, however long it takes, to get to an outcome that is then deployed into production, for example. The problem with waterfall is that a lot of times, by the time there's a lag between when you come up with what is the problem that you're trying to solve and when you eventually get presented as a business executive or a business leader with the outcome that was implemented. So in that time, all sorts of things can happen in an organization and outside of it that would influence all of that thinking that was done way ahead of the game. So when you adopt an agile, I guess, way of working, you don't necessarily need to know everything up front. You just need to have certain goalposts, and then you work through with your teams through the problems and those solutions, and you kind of build it one block by one block, one on top of the other, and eventually towards the end of your project or your program, you have something that is a lot closer, if not identical, to what the business at that point in time actually requires or needs, rather than what they wanted or needed 2 or 3 years ago. So it's a much more, I guess, a nimble and lean way of operating, and both internally within technology, but also with your business stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you for the explanation. Yeah.
No worries.
The 3-4 years sounds like quite a long time.
It is. That's right. I mean, in IT, many years ago, you will put together, say, a strategy, for example, that will, look at, to, 5 years or even 10 years, right? But nowadays, really, if you're looking 1 to 2 years is already, a fair amount of time, right? Because everything, things are changing quite rapidly nowadays.
But I think the challenge might be, between the waterfall and agile, because you can't, in thinking of an architecture function, you can't do some of those things in sprints of 2 weeks. So you would have to be basically having, initially a longer time, and to do that, because the way I always think is, the analogy with building a house, right? So you go to the original architect, what you want, your lifestyle, whatever that might be. They come up with the blueprint. Once it's approved, then you go to the civil engineers, all the engineers, to calculate all the stuff, and then to the builders to build.
Yeah.
So there's some foundational pieces, even though, yes, you can deliver in an agile way, but at the beginning of some definitions, some foundational, that to be a bit of a challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I take the program we are on as an example, most definitely we had at the beginning, definitely some, conceptual views of where we're heading, right? They weren't, detailed to the nth degree. They had possibly pieces that were missing, and that was okay. But we identified all of those, right? And we said, this is what it kind of looks like where we think we're heading. Now we need to work on this, on this, on this, on this, on this, on this, on this. And then we started to break that out, allocate to different architects to work on in collaboration. And yeah, absolutely. A lot of those things don't, you can't fit in a 2-week sprint, right? They might take you an entire, 3-month block, right? But you plan for it, right? And you start to, I guess, by the end of that 3-month block, you would have it completed, but during that period, you are, I guess, ticking off pieces of that bigger block, right? Through individual artifacts that you're able to govern, I guess, in a more lean way. So yeah, absolutely. It's a mixture of having a bit of a forward-thinking look at the beginning and then working through, I guess, the gaps and the details throughout the program to kind of complement what the end state looks like.
And maybe, I don't know, using the feedback loop from DevOps.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have really rigorous processes that we use for engaging other parts of other teams and other parts of the organization to then feed their comments, their points of view into the architecture as we're putting it together, right? So by the time we got something that we believe is pretty much there, just about everybody who would have a point of view has seen it, has provided their feedback, and then it's just a matter of putting it through our governance processes. So yeah, absolutely, very important.
We know technology is changing all the time. This is also what our podcast is focusing on. So what sort of changes have you seen over the years within IT architecture? Is there a particular one that you have felt the most?
Yeah, well, look, from the late 80s to 90s, there was quite a lot of focus on, I guess, on frameworks, and how to do architecture, right? And this is, this framework says this framework says that, and it was kind of very heavy on IT architecture, I would say, focused on technology. But, in my experience over the years, I've started to see organizations starting to shift a little bit, as I mentioned before, it is a journey, but shift a little bit more towards that partnership realm, right? Where it's not so much, one part of the organization comes up with the ideas of, what we do next, and then we go over to technology and we say, okay, well, we need to implement this. That still happens though, right? And it happens probably more often than we like, but I definitely have seen a shift, at least in the organizations that I worked in or I worked for, of a bit more of a partnership at the top, at the CXO level, that then cascades down, to other realms within technology. And obviously that involves architectures, whether it's to guide them to better products or services or business opportunities, or even more commonly is operational excellence, right? So how do I optimize cost in my organization? So for me personally, I like to see a lot more of that happen, and adoption, and having IT and especially architecture, a seat at the table, further up the hierarchy of the organization to kind of influence those early decisions as early as possible.
As you mentioned before, some companies don't have exactly the architecture function, right? And also, some people believe, suggesting in blogs or LinkedIn posts somewhere, that enterprise architecture is dead already, especially with the cloud. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Simon. I actually seen some of those posts myself, a while back, and to be honest, I was a little bit shocked when I saw them. And look, I respect those points of view. Everybody's is free to express their opinions. I personally don't really subscribe to that commentary. To be honest, I think that as long as technology continues to play such a dominant part in how organizations evolve and innovate, you will need some form of architecture to guide these initiatives, short, medium, long term. We have seen, it's more common nowadays to give power to developers, for them to innovate, come up with products, and that's great, and that's gonna continue to happen more and more. But I definitely see architecture still having a role to play when it comes to I guess longer term sustainability of all of those initiatives, especially when your ecosystem starts to grow in size and complexity. There are all sorts of constraints and risks that come into play that architecture helps you to navigate for the for the better of the organization overall. So yeah, myself, I don't really subscribe to it. I think architecture is going to be here for a long time. Like I said, organizations adopt it and change it pretty much every year, right? To suit their needs, and that's okay. That's part of life. But yeah, I don't really think architecture is dead. I think we'll be needing architecture for a long time to come.
Well, as we mentioned before, and the complexity keeps growing, right? And architecture is not ceasing to exist anytime soon. How do you see enterprise architecture in the next few years? And what would you like to see changing or evolving to?
Yeah, so similar to some of the comments I kind of said before, I think the role of the architect itself, has been evolving over time and kind of maturing from, just someone who potentially is handed out, a set of requirements and puts together a solution, and then it gets implemented, to a person who is an advisor at different levels of the organization. What I would like to see is the role of the architect shifting a lot more into the business and really influencing where technology can help, where perhaps our business colleagues might not even know that that's as a possibility. It's just bringing the art of the possible, I guess, to our business colleagues. So that's what I would like to see. As an individual in architecture, and really not just in architecture, but it's almost really up to you to figure out what value you bring to the organization and where you can interject yourself to influence the mind of somebody in such organization. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be the CEO. It could be just a GM or one of your colleagues in technology. So yeah, for me, architecture, as I said, is got a long runway ahead, but I would like to see our role shifting, carrying all our technology acumen, but shifting a lot more into the business and really helping our business leaders in their quest.
Bring in the art of the possible. I like that.
Well, going back to one of the questions in terms of the life of architecture, etc.
Yeah.
I have been seeing, so in some of the blogs and some of the people I know personally, put those posts in there, we don't need architects, we only need engineers. Is that a trend, or is just this small number of people that I have been seeing?
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, it's definitely a trend. I have seen it. I even have friends in other organizations who are actively championing, right, that model. Not necessarily about not having architects, but definitely empowering your engineers and your devs to kind of take charge and go and implement, go be creative. And I think that's great to do that, because you do need that aspect to innovate. But eventually, you do need oversight from people who know how to put all these pieces together so that they don't shoot yourself in the foot, right? So you can't put 20 great products into production. At some point, you're going to find out you got a mess from an integration point of view, from a support point of view, or you're spending a ton of money every month on bills that you really could have done without. Perhaps some of these applications are not performing as well as they should because nobody thought about X, Y, Z at the beginning. So look, I like almost everything in IT, right? There is trends, and eventually, like the Garner's hype cycle, yeah, they go great. Eventually, they come down and they go, well, actually, it's a bit of a compromise, right? So I would take it with a pinch of salt, and it will be a balance of both worlds, I think.
And even for some roles that they are recruiting for, of course, I don't, maybe because of the pandemic, I don't know, but they are looking for a unicorn. So they want the architect and thinking of the high level, etc. But they also want deep hands-on in everything.
Yeah.
So
it is very hard. They are indeed unicorns, right? Very hard to find. And what you also find is that even if you do find them, they'll be so sought after that you'll have to work so hard to keep them, right? Because there will always be, a big giant around the corner that will go, hey, oh, they're really good. He's a really good offer. And look at, the organization I work for. Come and work for me. And then it's gone. He or she, right? So I think, I think it's a mixture. Everything in balance is good in life. So as instead of looking for unicorns, I will look for capable people that can operate in different modes and I guess operate in different roles but complement each other.
Yeah, let's see what
happens, eh? Yes.
So what are you most passionate about in tech? What are you curious about right now? And what is the next thing you want to learn?
Yeah, so what I'm most passionate about is actually your domain. So, for me, data analytics has been close to my heart for quite some time now. And I've been following it closely. What do the different vendors bring to the table? What do the cloud vendors bring to the table? How are they competing with each other? So I try to keep my eye on blogs or webinars as much as possible to see, I guess, what's new in this space. For me, the data space obviously is nothing new. It has absolutely exploded in the past few years, and I think it's going to continue to do that more and more. And the applications of using data in any organization are just immense. You just need, I guess, the know-how and a bit of that art of the possible to try to bring them to life. In all sorts of different contexts. So for me, it's gonna continue to keep my ear to the ground on what's happening in the space, at least for a few years, if not for a long time.
It's definitely an exciting and growing domain, so it's
absolutely.
Watch out for it.
Amazing.
So, what would be the best way to land a job in tech? What advice would you give to people who are trying to enter the tech industry, either from uni or changing careers completely? But they can't just get the first job, the first opportunity. So, especially, of course, in the architecture realm. So, what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, sure. my recommendation would be for anyone really wanting to land a job in architecture in particular, would be patience, regardless of, I guess whether it's a change of within technology or you're just new to the industry. My recommendation is go and try all sorts of things, go and try all sorts of different roles, go to different organizations, perhaps travel around, work in different countries if that's possible, work in complex organizations and simple ones, experience good cultures, bad cultures, everything really that working in technology really has to offer, because there is opportunities to learn in doing all of those things. Work on organizations that are really progressive in tech and organizations that have got, heavy legacy background. All of these things are going to allow you, they're kind of tools in your toolkits that then allow you to, I guess, be more successful in your role. Have a lot of successes and lots of failures too, right? So I have spoken to lots of people throughout my career who have been wanting to get into architecture, and have told me, Gab, like, how do I do it? I've been applying, like I don't land an interview, or I don't land a role. What am I doing wrong? And my answer to them has always been, I don't think you're doing anything wrong, right? Architecture, really, for me, an implicit definition of an architect is someone who's done all of those things that I described before, because that's what allows you to advise, right, in an organization, and really provide that kind of leadership aspect. So don't despair, keep trying and try different things. And if you're new, out of uni, there is no way you're going to know out of uni what you would like to do in tech. There is a million things that you can do in tech, but start somewhere, anywhere. It doesn't really matter where. Perhaps start on what you're really good at. Perhaps you're really good at coding. Perhaps get a job in coding somewhere and just doing that. And you will, through that very first job, you will get connections. You will find out how an organization works. Perhaps you will have a look at the person working next to you who's doing design, and you look, oh, maybe I like some of that, and talk to that person. So networking is really important. And so don't despair. Don't stress about, I want to be an architect in X years or whatever. Just start somewhere and keep progressing through there. You never know, you might get to a point where you go, well, actually, I don't want to be an architect at all, right? So that's what I would say. What I have seen happen before is, if you get into architecture perhaps too early, there's a number of things that may happen. It may happen that you are really successful, no worries, you really enjoy the role, and I guess you got enough background and experience to help you succeed. What I've also seen happen is that you don't have a lot of those foundations, and you may feel a little bit overwhelmed, or that you're not as effective as you could be. And so hence why I always kind of advise to just take your time. Perhaps if you're going for an interview of some sort of architect role and you don't land it, seek feedback as to what is it that they didn't see in you, and then work on those perhaps in your next role, right? And eventually you'll do it, you'll get it. So yeah, I think if you're just starting, apart from giving it a go, I think it's important to just be show that you're enthusiastic, that you're willing to learn. Those kind of traits go a long way, even if you are really experienced, right? So when you're just starting, don't worry about where I'm gonna be in a number of years, or how do I get into architecture. Just start somewhere and learn.
Yeah, I guess that's really good advice, not just for aspiring architects, but for anyone looking for a job in tech in general.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
So how do you keep up with the changes within tech? Are there any tools or technology that makes your life easier?
Yeah, look, it's very hard indeed. I would say for me, it's a combination of both internal and external stimulus. I would say a lot of times we find out about what's new in the industry, in a particular industry, through vendors, right? That come and say, hi, I've got this brand new platform, or we are kind of moving our organization into this different direction, like to come and have a chat. So that's one way. Definitely networking is another huge, probably the main aspect, I would say. I'm always finding out about what's new from people who I've worked with before, or colleagues of them, either through tools like LinkedIn or whatnot, or it could be through just informal catch-ups, right? So I think it's kind of varied, and it kind of depends on what style of how do you would like to consume information, right? I'm not myself a particular person that likes to be connected to 10 different apps all the time, like an RSS feed, and be, I guess, inundated with information all the time. I go out and seek it when I have time, but most of the times either internally or through colleagues, and that seems to be, or through vendors, and that seems to be working out okay so far.
Are there any books that have particularly inspired you that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, well, look, I am a person that's actually quite big on health and maintaining a balance in life. So, lately I've been reading quite a few books on, I guess, how do you balance the stimulus of everything else that's happening in your life with, what's really important for you. So I've been reading this book. I haven't quite finished it yet, called How to Do Nothing. I'll send you the comments of the author and stuff. But essentially, it's a book about how do you, I guess, filter all the attention stimulus that comes to you from whichever source for your own benefit, and you're able to eventually carve out time for what's really important in your life, right? And so, it's great if you really loved your job, obviously, to be connected as much as possible with the rest of the colleagues on site, off site. But, that's your work, I guess, the work aspects of it. As outside of it, there's a million things happening in social media all the time, and it's kind of easy to get, absorbed in whatever else is happening and who's doing what. So this book kind of walks you through a whole bunch of research studies that have been done, even from, like hundreds of years ago, on the effects of stimulus on different types of people, and kind of gives you a few tools for you to kind of set some boundaries in your life to give you that, I guess, that clarity on what's important. So yeah, I'll send you the notes. It's a really good book. I think it was one of Barack. It was kind of endorsed by Barack Obama, or one of his top books for 2019. I think it was, and it's really good.
Yeah, I have really enjoyed our conversation today. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. But is there anything else you would like to add, or anything else you would like to talk about?
No, I think that's great. I mean, it's been amazing talking to you. It's first time for me that I've done, podcast like this. So it's great to share, a bit of my experiences, particularly in architecture, and hopefully, that help someone else out who might be in a similar situation. But happy to hear different points of view that others may have, or if people want to connect and find out a little bit more. So that's all good. Happy to do that.
That's exactly my next question. How can people connect with you?
Right. Yeah, I would say the easiest is probably through LinkedIn. So yeah, message or ping me. That's fine, and then I'll reach back out to you. Happy to organize, a meetup of some sort. And now that we are able to get back out there, even have a coffee, that'd be amazing. So yeah, that was what I would recommend.
Great. Thanks, Gab.
No worries. Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion with Gabriel. We certainly did. Thank you for listening. Until next time.